I was sentenced to 20 years of hard labor. I was 18 years old. You could see people dropping to the ground one by one. By the time the parade was over, 4 or 5 people had dropped down. I was never a member of the party, but in my heart I was always a communist, even when I served time in the camps. There were 15 to 20 people in here. The military base was on the site of the old camp. You can still see the old sign, Gulag. It must have read Gulag. My father served in an NKVD camp in Germany after the war. I don't know the details. My father said very little about it. But I know that conditions were very harsh. They had to stand up to their waists in water. Every day, dead bodies were thrown out of a hole in the wall. That's what he saw and experienced. And that was the way things were until the changes in 1989. By that time, it wasn't called the NKVD anymore. But these prisons continued to exist with the same harsh conditions. Not exactly the same, but there were still flooded basements when I was already serving as a priest, 30 kilometers from the place where my father had served time. For me, it's just a dilapidated old building. I celebrated Mass there 3 times in the basement where the isolation cell had been. There was a terrible feeling there. The camera broke. On the camera the words "help me" began to flash because the camera needed help. It broke just when we were praying for those who had perished. Help me, help me, help me. I know 3 people who suffered in this isolation cell, so I know for a fact that it happened in the camps during Stalin's time. When I refused the first hearing, they inserted needles into my fingers under the nails. They crushed my fingers indoors. I was tried and tried. They gave me 10 years imprisonment and 5 years disenfranchisement for betrayal of the motherland. Geologists prospect the Kolyma region. Huge resources discovered. At the end of 1931, the party and government decided to develop the Kolyma region. I was tried by the Carpathian Military District Tribunal in Ukraine. How old are you? 17 years old. What was your sentence? 25 years. I was sentenced to 20 years hard labor. I was 18 years old. I just started studying at the teacher training college. I'd only been studying there for 3 months when I was arrested. I was studying in the town of Kutaisi at the teacher training college in my third year. I was arrested on some pretext, allegedly for praising Trotsky and Bukharin. How could I confess? I didn't do it. How could I slander myself? And because I wouldn't confess, they beat me so badly. So that you confess? That's right, so that I confess. Just so that they could convict you. You'd already been convicted, hadn't you? Yes, I'd been convicted anyhow, but they needed evidence as well. The Kolyma region was discovered 3 centuries ago. It covers an area of 500,000 square kilometers. That's 1.5 times the area of Japan. For a year I was detained in custody while they investigated my case. And in 1936 a 3-man commission from the Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs issued sentences for 1,100 people. They were all found guilty, and almost all of us were given 10 years. I wasn't the only one, of course. There were lots of men like me who were taken away, and most of us were given 25 years. The top priority was the urgent delivery of supplies to the mines in the upper reaches of the Kolyma River. Those working in the mines were short of food. The distrustful Tungus people refused to provide reindeer to carry the supplies. In 1940 I was sent to the Kolyma. On the 3rd of July I was brought here on a steamship called Kiev. We were brought to the Nagaev Bay. The steamship was called Minsk. It carried both goods and passengers. We were carried in the holds of the ship, 9,000 prisoners. It was already autumn and there were major storms. Water got into the holds of the ship. The water came up above our knees. For many it was lethal. In the adjacent hold there were repeat offenders. They were trying to break down the walls to get to the women, although of course they didn't manage to do so. Our steamship was called Nogin. We took 10 days to reach Magadan because there was such a major storm.
I came to Magadan, Russia because I heard the voice of the Lord during spiritual exercises. And he said to me, go and pray in the camps. There is the crown of thorns is made from the barbed wire from the prison camps. This number is one of the parishioners. That was her name for the 8 years that she was in the prison camps. This is a unique icon of the martyrs, the confessors of the Kalima, those who suffered. It's the faces of priests and bishops and sisters, both Orthodox and Catholic, who suffered here in the Kalima. And of course, it's not just the faces of those that we know, but it's the faces of those we don't know. And so in the icon you see the many, many halos that indicate of the many numbers of people that died that we don't know of, that died and are buried somewhere in unknown graves in the Kalima.
No graves were dug for them. Trenches were dug and tags with numbers attached to their naked bodies. They were thrown into the trenches and buried by a bulldozer. When spring and summer came, wild animals dragged their bones away over the hills. Such was their fate. Prisoners from the northeastern NKVD corrective labor camps at work on the Nagaev-Kolyma highway. We were forced to work for 12 hours at a time. If we began at 8 in the morning, we were finished at 8 in the evening. If we started at 8 in the evening, we finished work at 8 in the morning. We were poorly fed because deliveries were delayed. There were times when we were given 3 hard biscuits for a day. Just 3 biscuits, 3 pieces. I ate 2 and saved 1 for the following day in case we weren't given anything the next day. A hunter carrying a Winchester rifle. Enterprising foreigners attempting to lay hold of the riches of the Kolyma. We worked 14 hours at a time. What did you do? At Butygichak, there were different kinds of work. First of all, it was a concentrating plant. They mined tin and washed the ore. If you worked in the mill, that was very hard because of the dust. You couldn't see other people. The machinery made an awful noise, and everyone was covered in white dust, as if they were covered in flour. That's where people contracted silicosis. They extracted the tin and gained access to uranium ore. We were made to work in temperatures down to minus 48 degrees Celsius. At minus 50, we didn't have to work. Engaged in the construction of a new region, people experience new birth. Very often people died of emaciation. Sometimes when you were called out to parade, you could see people dropping to the ground one by one. By the time it was over, 4 or 5 people had dropped down and been carried off on stretchers, dead. Sometimes 10 to 12 people would die in the space of 24 hours. From the cold, from overwork. They'd protest. People didn't want to work and were forced to, even though they didn't want to. The best shock workers are offered the chance to study. I knew that people were shot because my husband was in a camp working on the highway, and he himself was led out 3 times. They counted them out. 10, 10, 10. Somehow he was lucky. He was spared. They just counted them out and shot the 10th person, just by count. Yes, yes. They just lined them up and the 10th person was taken aside. They were put into a bag made of mattress cloth. The bag was fastened, a tag was attached, and they were taken away. The soil here has a deep layer of permafrost. The construction of the road was a fierce battle against nature. We would try to dig into the soil a bit, but because of the permafrost it was frozen solid, so they would simply throw in the bodies and a bulldozer would come by and bury them. When we had to go outside the camp to get firewood or do something else, you could see bones lying around everywhere. We were walking on dead bodies. This day is for you. We treasure your sufferings, your lives. This chapel should be a place of prayer. Through prayer, through faith, we find hope. I'm so grateful to God for our community, that He's given us one another. We can share in the suffering, which still goes on.
Yesterday and the day before, when I was in the church praying,
Something surprised me as I was looking at this marvelous icon above the altar. The icon relates to the name of this parish, the Nativity of Christ. It reminded me of images in ancient churches in Germany in which so much is depicted. People didn't used to read, they saw, and that was how they received the gospel. On this icon of the Nativity of Christ, I noticed the shepherds and St. Joseph, to whom the angel appeared in a dream, the wise men, Mary, the Christ child. Seeing so much on the icon, I thought perhaps Magadan is here somewhere. And then, during a time of reflection and prayer, the thought came to me, Magadan is here. Magadan is the dark cave, the black dot on the icon, where there's nothing, representing all those terrible things that went on. And in that connection, it's very touching that this parish has been called the Nativity of Christ. Even here, in this dark place, Christ wants to be born.
В самый темный момент, то есть в самое темное место Христос желает родиться.
А можно вот такую вот отдать? Можно. Святый Боже, святый.
We don't pray for the martyrs, we pray with the martyrs. And their prayers join with our prayers. And we pray then for the faith to be rebuilt and the church to be rebuilt in Russia.
These are people who gave their lives. No one asked them, do you want to die or not? God forbid that there should ever be martyrs of that kind, in that way. God created man that he might live, that he might fill the earth, and that he might rejoice. May this place help us to keep alive the memory of those who suffered and died in the Kolyma. May this also be a place where we find inner strength and courage, remembering their courage and strength. Our way is the way of the cross, but it's always the way to victory. That's an award given to my youngest granddaughter. How many grandchildren do you have, Stepan Prokopovich? 7 grandchildren. Unless I'm mistaken. 8. Yes, 8. I don't have anything of great value. This is my father, and this is my mother. She's also passed away. How did your parents take it when you were arrested? Very badly, of course. Did you keep in touch with them in any way? The first 4 years I didn't have any contact at all. It was only allowed after the death of Stalin. This is my wife. Transcarpathian Cossacks. I love the Cossacks. I'm a Ukrainian myself. This is the Cossack host writing to the Turkish Sultan with a feather quill. Of course I have regrets. After all, my whole youth just passed by. There was nothing good about it, just work and imprisonment. All the tortures. Remembering it now, my heart sinks as I think about how my life has gone. No, I don't have any regrets now because I suffered. Unjustly, you could say. I don't hold a grudge against anyone or harbor hatred. I don't know why, I just have peace about it. Of course it's sad that my youth, the best years of my life, were lost, wasted. I wanted to be someone else, of course. I had other dreams for my life. But this is the way things turned out. I suppose it's the Lord's will. The case of Quantiliani Gedeon Ambrosevich has been reconsidered and closed, and he has been rehabilitated. From the chairman of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, Zyuganov. Was he right to write to you? They didn't forget. Of course he was right. The Central Committee of the party never forgets. Are you still in the party? I was never in the party. I was never a member of the party, but in my heart I was always a communist. Even when I served time in the camps, logging and here in the gold mines, the whole time I was a communist at heart. Do you understand? Why? Because a real communist should be like Stalin. When Stalin died, he didn't even have clothes to be buried in. The road up to the Kolyma river is now easy and simple. It now takes 15 hours instead of 15 days to travel from Nagaev Bay up to the river Kolyma. Nagaev Bay. The Kolyma River. I came to see the Mask of Sorrow, not my daughter, the memorial to those of us who were repressed. Ernst Neizvestny built it, as far as I know, in memory of people who perished during the period of repression in our country. Flowers, no. People don't need flowers here. They just come, take photographs, maybe they drink champagne. Wedding parties come here. At the entrance there's a statue, it's crying, and flowers. It must be something bad, in remembrance of someone. Maybe it was some soldiers, maybe someone who accomplished something, some achievement. To those who were repressed? Which people, when? No idea. I don't know much about it. I know he was a very good person who was repressed. He was very clever, educated, with a university education, a surgeon. It's in Magadan because he died here. They abused him, they caused him sorrow, so that's why they call it the Mask of Sorrow. It's unfortunate that in Magadan there's no memorial to the camps. Why is that? I've been to Auschwitz, but here there's nothing. I don't know why. We can't say that this chapter in the history of humankind is closed like a page in a book, that everything is over and in the past. Stalin is dead, but human cruelty is a terrible thing. And to make sure it doesn't happen again, we need more than just memorials. We need people.
This is the wall of memory. On this wall are crosses And each cross represents a person who died in the Kalima. They have a name, but we don't know where they're buried. So this is a place we'll place their cross and we'll pray for them and remember them. This is a place for anyone, for relatives who died in the Kalima. They can send a name to us in Magadan, or who died in Siberia, and we'll place a cross in honor of them, and they'll be prayed for in this chapel of the martyrs.